things, but she's also going to tell us how we can be involved. And so I'll let her introduce herself more fully. Take it away, Susie.
Thank you, Jean. And thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it. And thanks for the welcome this morning. I just, ditto to the person who wrote that letter. This is the first time I've been here for worship, and felt welcome from the minute I hit the parking lot until the end of the service. So well done. Nice. And I've been in a lot of churches, so well done. I told Jean she could introduce me as just a mom, advocate, and development director for the Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice. That pretty much sums up all the pieces of my life. I am the development director, and you might be saying, did they have anybody else besides the fundraiser who could come and talk this morning? And the truth is, we have lots of people on staff who can do presentations, but my role this morning and why I came in particular is because of the other piece of my history, which is that I have a 25-year history of working with churches on the intersection of faith and justice. So I'm going to share a little bit about that, but first I'm going to tell you who we are, and then just frame some of our current reality at Iowa MMJ. I do need to say a couple disclaimers up first. First of all, I am not an attorney, so if you ask me legal specific questions, I will not be able to answer them. Only in broad strokes, and how it affects the people in our sphere. Secondly, even though I'm not an attorney, we all say that nothing that we say ever should be construed as legal advice. So just, that's our, because we have a bunch of attorneys on staff, that's our disclaimer. And then the third thing is that I will probably say, I don't know, or I don't know today, or we'll get back to you on that a lot. And that's just the state of immigration today. So the only one piece that I will retract the disclaimer on is when I share a little bit about the faith component of welcome, that's timeless. So there's no time limit on that. But everything else is only what we know as of today, April, 27th at 10 a.m. in the morning. And it literally could change by noon. So with that, let me just share a little bit about our history. First of all, Iowa Migrant Movement for Justice, I always think Methodists would love this connection that we are the merging of two longtime immigrant rights and immigrant serving organizations, Justice for Our Neighbors, Iowa, and then the Iowa branch of the American Friends Service Committee. So we're founded in Methodist values and Quaker values. Some really great values to be steeped in. So that's our history. We came together about 5 years ago, became an official nonprofit 4 years ago, and here we are today. We have three primary aspects of our work, and my notes are more to keep myself on track so I don't go off track than anything, because I hope to leave a lot of time for questions. So the first, we talk about having a stool, a 3- or 4-legged stool for our work. I'm going to talk about the three primary legs of our organizational stool. The first one is immigration legal services. So that's what we do. We work with people who are DACA, here under DACA. We work with temporary protected status. We get state funding to work with victims of violence. And you might say most of the folks who come to us, regardless of status, are victims of violence in some way. We work with people who are trying to get green cards and who are trying to become U.S. citizens, a naturalization program, and those kinds of things. So we're an organization that does one of the broadest range of immigration legal services, specifically, and here's the key, for low-income individuals. So our attorneys make pittance, and our legal staff makes a pittance compared to what you would make as an attorney in the legal world, because all of our services are geared towards low-income individuals, and so all of our services are free or low cost. So that's our niche. We are a statewide organization. And it's important to say that we only do immigration legal services. It's a real distinction. We don't do any other kinds of legal services. So I like to use this very practical example. If a immigrant came to us in need of a divorce, we would not handle that. We would send them somewhere else. We only deal with the immigration legal services. We do that primarily in 7 what we call clinics across the state. We have our largest one here in Des Moines, and then we have clinics in Cedar Rapids, Decorah, Marshalltown, Ottumwa, Storm Lake, where I was yesterday with Jean, and then we just put one in Story County, so we do one in Ames. So that is where we have legal clinics. Our legal staff goes out to those clinics and sees anywhere from, depending on the time that they spend at the clinics, anywhere from 5 to 10 people in appointments, specifically related to immigration legal services. So we have a traveling staff. So that's our legal services. The second piece of our work, and the thing that I will tell you was probably the most attractive to me, was our advocacy program, our advocacy work. And so what I love about Iowa MMJ is it's not just the basic human need of legal services, the basic need that's provided, but it's also the advocacy for immigrant rights, so that the basic rights of immigrants are maintained and upheld. And so we have 3 community organizers on staff. And those community organizers could be doing any number of things on any day of the week. Particularly over the last 2 or 3 months, we were at the State House often. Often. And not just playing defense, by the way. We were there before the legislative session began, saying, here's the top 7 issues that our immigrant community has articulated are important to them. And so we'd like to see if you would introduce some legislation around these kinds of things. And so we did that proactively before the session, and then, of course, throughout the session was there as vocal opponents of some bills that would not support the basic rights or needs of immigrant communities. So we were there in mass a couple of times. So I'm happy to say, though, that there were 15 what we would classify, no, excuse me, there were 16 of what we would have classified as bills that were not helpful or I mean, you can say anti-immigrant, but I can say they just would not have supported and made it much more difficult for our immigrant brothers and sisters. We like to think that we were part of a large part of the reason why 15 of those bills out of the 16 have not moved on, or did not move on yet. The session isn't over, but we're really hopeful that almost every one of those things did not come out of the legislative session. So thrilled about that. When our organizers aren't doing visiting with legislators and showing up at subcommittees, meetings, and those kinds of things, then we're doing grassroots organizing, leadership development, worker rights and protections. So we have one of our organizers who's particularly skilled at advocating for people who have had wages stolen by employers, who are victims of wage theft. Employers, and you know, it's bad apples. There can be bad apples in every group, but there are a handful of employers that would exploit people on a perception about a status and then not pay them under the auspice of this person is not going to make a big deal out of it because they don't have this status. And so happily, again, we were able to help at least 3 members of our community get back almost $10,000 in stolen wages. So that's work that we do. Lately, and probably other than being at the State House, one of the largest shares of our work recently has been doing Know Your Rights presentations and safety planning trainings for all sorts of people in our community, for schools, for colleges, for businesses, for other nonprofits, for immigrants themselves. There's a lot that people want to know and understand about what the rights are around, if ICE or somebody came into our space, what are our rights, what can we do, what can we say, how do we deal with that? And so there's a lot around that we've been doing, and we've been offering tens of trainings on Know Your Rights. It may even be at 100. I want to add it up one of these days just to know, but been in lots of places where our organizers and our founder has been invited to talk about those kinds of things. The reality is, the reason why we've been so many places is because at the end of the day, and this is the one thing that I hope that you can take away very clearly, is that the U.S. immigration system is extraordinarily complex. And there is no one answer that fits any question. And so the complexities around rights are massive. And as somebody who works at an immigrant rights organization, I worry about information that people think that they have, that they really don't. Because it is so complex and is almost a case-by-case basis. So we can give some broad strokes about rights, but at the end of the day, there's a lot that goes with that. And then we do leadership training. We do a lot of empowering of individuals. I don't like the word empower because that implies that we do something. We don't do anything. We cultivate the gifts that are already there among our immigrant refugee communities and help do trainings to provide some leadership skills that any of us would benefit from in terms of leading advocacy efforts and engagement. Because we are a member-based organization. And so all of our work is led by our immigrant and refugee voices. So the third leg of so we do legal services, the advocacy or immigrant rights side, and then the third leg of our stool is narrative change work. And I don't think I have to tell any of you that the false narratives or around immigration are ubiquitous today. We will sometimes get asked, will you come and do a debunking myths presentation? And we're really hesitant to do that for 2 reasons. The first of which is we couldn't possibly, there isn't an entity that has enough time for us to debunk all the myths. It would be like playing whack-a-mole, right? We can't possibly debunk all the myths. The other thing is we don't like repeating the myths because then that's what you hear in your head when you leave. And so what we will say is we don't want to come and do that, but what we will come and do is share about how immigrants and refugees add value to our Iowa communities. And if you want that presentation, then we'll come and share that. So narrative change work, it is huge right now because there's so many, and not just false narratives, but just ill-informed narratives. People have no idea how the larger immigration process works, and so come up with these perceptions that they're just repeating that may or may not be true. So narrative change work is a big focus for us right now. We've recently trained, well, first of all, we did 3 years of research under a grant for what narratives are relatable in our Iowa communities. What are the shared values that Iowans have across the state? And then how do narratives around immigration move the needle just a little bit on how people perceive immigrants or immigrant value? And so after 3 years of research, we have spent last year training some what we call narrative change ambassadors. I know, not very creative, but these folks who are being trained to articulate some of these narratives that we try to use on staff about the value add of immigrant communities and what it means to be welcoming and inclusive. That's actually some narrative that really seems to land well with folks, is the welcome and inclusion, and then some language around economics as well. So, meeting the moment, let me just move on because you're probably all, we hear daily, oh my gosh, you guys are probably going crazy. The truth is, some days, yes. Some days we feel like we're charging towards a wall and we don't know whether we're going to go over it or through it or get knocked out by it. This is the reality that we're in. But fear is the common denominator amongst our staff. And if fear, even for people who are here with clear documentation, those folks are still afraid. We know of people that are families whose children who are U.S. citizens are not going to school out of fear. We know of people that were immigrants and refugees who have been actively contributing in positions who are not going to work out of fear. So fear really is the common denominator amongst not just our immigrant and refugee clients and members, but also we have an immigrant staff. We have a diverse staff, and one of the most wonderful things that I can share with you is also the most horrifying to me as a U.S.-born white individual is we recently moved our office location. The first reason, absolutely fabulous. We added capacity to our staff. We added more legal capacity. We added an organizer. We added some comms and marketing staff that we didn't have before. So absolutely phenomenal reason. The other reason was because our staff was terrified. Because all of us were, because we know that immigrant serving organizations are being targeted today. And we were in a building that didn't have safety, that was not conducive to keeping us all safe. And so we moved locations to be in a place that provided some more safety. That is horrifying for me as a person of faith. And I will share with you an experience I had. And to be clear, I like to say I'm apolitical in every way. Like, I'm a Jesus lover and that's my guide, and it can look very politically different on any day. But I was giving a presentation at United Methodist Church recently. I won't say where because I don't want to out anybody, but there was a person who was listening to me, and I was just simply giving an overview, just like I am for you, and tying it into some faith. And there was a person in the audience, in the room, it was a smaller group, that raised their hand and they said, after some Q&A time, they said, well, now I think this conversation has gotten a little too political. I'm a lifelong Republican and I'm a lifelong farmer. And I looked at him and I said, then you are the most important person in this room. And I want you to hear that. This is I'm leaning into the faith-based piece here. That individual was the most important person in the room, and I meant it. And what I said to him was this. There's a theologian and the founder of Homeboy Ministries. Maybe some of you have heard of that, Greg Boyle. And Greg Boyle says, if you love those who love you, big whoop. Right? So I said to him, if I go out and advocate on behalf of just the basic human needs and rights of immigrants, big whoop. I work for an immigrant rights organization. But what if you, as a lifelong farmer and a Republican, simply said, no, it is not okay that you hang flyers in Hampton, Iowa that say there's no limit to the number of immigrants you can bag? What if you simply said, no, it is not okay to use violent rhetoric towards our immigrant community? No, it is not okay to trample on anybody's basic human rights, period. And I know you know those things to be true because you're sitting here on a Sunday morning in a United Methodist Church listening to me talk about immigration, right? So I say that in the way of saying, friends, sometimes those of us who are on the more progressive or moderate to progressive side of issues can get in that silo. We can get into this really, we can get into a space where we're not listening to the people around us or not inviting people to come into this issue where we have shared values. This is not me speaking on behalf of Iowa MMJ, but I will share my personal perception right now is we don't even have any capacity to get to changing policy. Like, that's another day. The bar is so low with immigration right now, we have to get to basic human decency first. Then we can talk about policy later. And there's a lot going around right now that is not even basic human decency. So, well, that said, I do want to share that our work is particularly hard because, so here's some level setting about where we are today. There is a policy tracker, administrative changes, policy changes in this since the new administration took office. And there have been no less than 250, in fact, I looked on the site, 255 policy changes related to immigration just in these 90-some days. 99, I think, today? Or is today 100? 255 was the last count. There may be more now. It was 2 days ago when I looked. How does that affect us? It affects us deeply because some of these policies take instant effect. And so to give you a very practical example of what can happen is recently there was a policy, there was a form that was changed. We had just done a clinic for refugees who needed an adjustment of status. They wanted a more permanent status and were moving into refugees are, of course, here with full documentation, but there is what's called an adjustment of status where people can have a more permanent status. We were doing one of those clinics, and we had served, I think it was 25 folks in that clinic. But the federal government had also said that just the Monday after we did that clinic, there was a new policy that came out that said that the form that was used for the adjustment of status that we were doing, they changed the form. All they did was change the question about gender. Instead of it saying, instead of you being able to select male, female, other was taken off. Right, under a different federal mandate, right, or an executive order. What that did was, and then they said the old form, we're not going to take that form anymore. So we were sitting there having just a significant number of legal staff having just spent a significant amount of time with 25 different people with all these forms that have to be signed and all these different things, and looking at the possibility of having to redo all of that work. as it turned out, in this particular case, they did come back and they say, well, you have 2 weeks grace. And so then we had to hurry up and get everything submitted. But that wasn't always the case. What we know from the previous administration is that a lot of those things, there wasn't a retraction and they were immediately effective. And so our legal staff will tell you it was not unusual regularly that they would come in on Monday and they would find out that everything that they had done the week before was worthless and they would have to redo it. And it's why when I was writing a grant recently to support our work, one of the program officers said, Susie, you increased staff capacity, but you didn't change the number of people you're going to serve. Can you reconcile that for me? And I'm like, yep. Because it takes us it can take us double the time because of this rapid fire policy change that has us redoing everything. So that is a real reality for us these days. Other than doing a lot of know your rights trainings and safety plannings, we're a statewide organization, and so we've tried to help build and are continuing the work of putting legal response teams and community defense teams in place. The legal response teams are for obvious reasons, some people who have some legal history that can assist with some things. They don't do what our attorneys do, but can assist with some administrative type pieces. But also community defense teams, which are teams of people that are in place in the event that a family member in the community is detained by ICE or there's a large-scale raid, that there are community defense teams in place that can be there simply to support those folks in that time, and their families and those kinds of things. And then we reinstated, one of the other things that we've done most recently is reinstate, we had a ICE reporting hotline, and we reinstated that. The reason why that's important is because, number one, then if somebody in the community has been detained, then we have some sense of the ability to engage these community defense teams that may, there may be an American-born child or a spouse or a aunt or an uncle that's left behind in that scenario, and so these community defense teams can quickly know how to support the rest of the family, right? But the other reason for that is just to try to minimize the stoking of fear. One of the things that we like to say in front of audiences is, in presentations, is that the worst thing that can happen is, somebody saying, we saw ICE here, and then it goes around the internet. Because those unconfirmed, situations can ramp up the fear level exponentially. And then you have people staying home again, and you have people not going here again, and you have people not going to the doctor again, and you have people not reporting crimes again, and you have all these things happening. So we put that in place because we have the capacity as an organization to go and say, yeah, that really was, or that wasn't an ICE presence. And then we have a newsletter where we can share information about what is happening and where. So I'd encourage you all to sign up for that newsletter on the main page of our site. Just scroll down and it's right there. So I'll close with just a few more thoughts about the faith-based response. And you all sitting here on a Sunday morning in a Methodist church, in my years of work with the intersection of spirituality and justice. Then I'm going to take some questions. When I was at the Capitol earlier in the legislative session, and we were there vocalizing opposition to a bill, in one of the subcommittee meetings, and again, I'm not going to say who or what piece of legislation, or because I'm not about throwing people under the bus. But in one of these subcommittee meetings, after a person that had been racially profiled spoke out, after an immigrant spoke out, after a law enforcement officer spoke out, after a pastor spoke out, after a social worker spoke out, after a teacher spoke out about this particular legislation. No voice of support in the room. We get to the people who can pass it out of committee, and the last person before he passed it out of committee said, "And Pastor, I'm a Christian, and I have no idea where in your Christian theology it says that we're supposed to take care of these illegals." And I was sitting there, and that almost broke my heart of where we are today in terms of theology, because even though you're not supposed to say anything out loud, I found myself just going, everywhere. Except for it's everywhere in our Christian text. Everywhere. Everywhere and everywhere and everywhere. The Greek word, this may not be new to you, but let me remind all of you that the Greek word that is most commonly used for hospitality in our Christian scriptures is philoxenia. Philo that's a word that's made up of two Greek words: phileo, love, xenos, stranger. The most commonly used word for hospitality in the Christian scriptures is love of stranger, literal translation. So that's a starting point for our Christian scriptures, but we don't have to stop there. I mean, as I've been immersed in the scriptural text over the years, themes of hospitality and welcome are just two of the themes that talk about why we should care for the stranger. Justice, righteousness, advocacy with the poor, marginalized, and most oppressed are all riddled from beginning to end, starting with our Exodus story. The Exodus story is about salvation for people who were oppressed and marginalized by the dictator of the day. That is our history as Christians. That's where it starts. And then you have this litany of people that it talks about in different parts of the Hebrew scriptures to care for the poor and the widow and the orphan and the stranger. Why those four particular groups? Because they were the most vulnerable four groups of people at that time in history. And I don't have time today to go into the didactic around that, but know that those groups are intentionally named because they were the most vulnerable groups. And then we have this theme of love and compassion and mercy that is riddled through our Christian scriptures. And I will finish with this because I think one of my favorite scriptures, and it might be a favorite of all of yours, is the prodigal son or the lost son, which we had during our Lenten series of scriptures. And the reason I love that scripture so much is I do want to put it in its historical, cultural context, which is this, that in that time and culture, the father in the family was considered the king. In other words, fathers didn't run out to meet their children anywhere. That was ridiculous. The thought of that was ridiculous. And especially the person who had literally blown their inheritance, which is the family lineage, which is all about family and lineage and everything. So the way that I come away from that scripture is with what Greg Boyle, again, I'm going to go back to him because he's got such a lovely phrase for this. The no matter whatness of God. I call it unconditionality. I made up my own word. Because no matter what, God is willing, that scripture is answering the question, what is God like? And there's 3 scriptures, parables. That's the third that talks about what is God like. So what is God like? God is willing to run out and look a fool to run out and meet us where we are at, regardless of our worst act. So if you want to talk about welcome in Scripture, I invite you to spend some time with that one, because that one really lifts up this unconditionality and the no matter whatness of God. So, with that, I'm going to take a couple of breaths, and then I'm going to invite your questions.
I have 2 microphones. I did have 2 microphones. I still do. Marty, would you maybe take the other one around? I have just a question about the folks that are here. How many of you have had Know Your Rights training either at work or you've gone to a workshop? That was 1. Perhaps we ought to, as a group, know a little bit more about that. I think we probably need to have a full session on that rather than just, but thank you. Questions?
Yeah, thank you for all that really good information. I know someone from Ukraine right now that's going through a lot of stress. She's a refugee on U4U, and she has been living in fear since January. She's a really close friend of mine. What would you recommend for people like her, to do right now? What can she do?
Does she need legal services or just in general?
Yeah, she can't afford a lawyer, for example.
Okay.
And she can't apply for TPS, and she doesn't know what her options are, and she doesn't know how long she can work for. Just all these questions.
Okay.
She's kind of like a big stressor.
And that is exactly the work that we do. So what I would tell you is I can't speak to her case or what she would need or anything.
Right.
But what I can tell you is that send her to our website, iowammj.org. We have a pre-screen form. We suggest anybody that thinks that they might need legal services or that has any particular legal service need to fill out that form. And that is how you get in our orbit in terms of getting started the process that we need to analyze whether or not there's a service we can help with or not. And if not, a list of resources that you might go to or those kinds of things. The only asterisk here is we're busy. And so, unfortunately, in this time, we promise that we will get back to people within a couple of months, but it may take a couple of months. And that's just literally because we could, to give you a practical example, one month last summer, we formally used a first call, first serve system, and we've shifted away from that. And I think the way that we do with the pre-screen form, it works exponentially better. But in any 1 week, 1 month to get the appointments for the clinic, there was 1 month in, I think it was August, where we had 400 calls for 10, I think it was 5 or 10 appointments. So, but people think with all of the current policies that you don't have the work that you used to have because, refugees aren't allowed anymore, and some of the countries from TPS have been eliminated and that kind of thing. But the reality is that there are residents of Iowa, actually 6% of our population, 200,000, and foreign-born individuals in the state of Iowa. And many of them have varying immigration legal service needs. And so even if quotas are ended from present moment, there's still enough work just amongst the people that are here in Iowa. So fill out our pre-screen form, yeah.
Other questions?
What's the difference between, let's say, a refugee and an immigrant? I'm acquainted with the young woman that Ramon mentioned who's a Ukraine refugee. I'm also acquainted with a woman who is a Ukraine immigrant, and she's been here about a year. So what's the difference?
Here's where you're going to test my knowledge of some of the broad strokes. We use, in our office, we use immigrant universally. So we say refugees are immigrants as well. I think one of the primary differences, and this probably is not the only one, and one of our legal staff would probably give you a much better answer, but one of the primary differences is with refugee status, it's an individual that's been had so many security clearances. They've applied to come to the United States. They've oftentimes spent time in a refugee camp or something like that, many times years, and they have been through security checks from Department of Homeland Security and the State Department, and there's a list of like 4 or 5 different types of security checks, and then eventually given an approval of admittance into the U.S. if they come here. So it's a little bit different than the immigration process, but again, that all speaks to how somebody came in, so I don't want to go too far there other than to know that that's the refugee process. But we use immigrant. Even refugees are immigrants who have just come here in a different type of way.
I've got a question over here, but let me add to that the word asylum seeker. So that adds another level. So an asylum seeker is what many of the people who cross the border and turn themselves in, that's a legal process. They are legally allowed to cross the border and seek asylum here. So that's what many of the immigrants that are undocumented are asylum seekers, so that complicates it too.
Yeah.
And we have a question here.
Like here's where you get into the complexities that even I work in. I regularly go, and Jean will tell you, I was at a presentation one of our attorneys did yesterday because I learned something new about the legalities every single day. So anyway, yeah.
I guess hopefully everybody can hear me too.
Yeah.
I want to go back to that narrative piece that you had before. And so a lot of the narratives that are used, either A, an immigrant is a gang member, 2, they're a terrorist, and this shouldn't be so, because even if you are one or the other, you still deserve due process of law and habeas corpus for the government to prove their charges, but it has been used as, well, they don't need those rights because of who they are. And so in my mind, that is one of the biggest obstacles right now and dangers is if it's okay to do it to that person, it's okay to do it to her, and it goes on and on. And so in my view, because a lot of immigrants, they work long hours, they pay taxes, you know, they're not staying in a New York hotel with a debit card, which isn't the whole story either, because the only reason they had to do that is because they were bused somewhere. And so I think part of the task is to show who these people are and they're human beings.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really important. A lot of times, and particularly in faith communities, I get asked the question, how do we communicate with somebody that we know has a very, very different perspective? And so, again, I'm speaking as Susie from a faith-based background, because that's the water I've drank for the last many years. But I would say, again, we're at a place today where the going back and forth with informational pieces just is not helpful. And so I always say to lead with holy curiosity, and I mean it, authentic curiosity. And what I mean by that is, and some statements that are just steeped in your own experience. So holy curiosity, statements that are steeped in your own experience. Let me give you an example. And this is kind of funny, so I love telling this story. I boarded a plane once, and I was going, I think, to visit my sister. I think it was a fun trip. It wasn't a work trip. And the person it was right after an election. And I won't tell you what election it was or anything like that, but the person sitting next to me was very talkative, which is fine. Sometimes that's fine. Other times I'm like, oh. But anyway, I was fascinated by him because one of his first comments to me when I said, oh, I'm from Iowa, I was picking up a connecting flight, was, oh, well, I guess I know which political party you're from. because we had just had an election and it had went a particular way. And I was, first of all, I was kind of sitting there taken aback, like, wow, that's a pretty good. I made a pretty big assumption about me based on an election, but okay. Now you've got my curiosity because it's piqued. And he started, and at that point, he started going into some really, what I would call anti-Muslim narrative. And, you know, I can tell you that my body wanted to do like all of the gut reaction that we all have, which is to say, that's not true, and Muslims this, and Muslims that, and Muslims this. And I just sat there and said, oh, well, that's not my experience of Muslims. And he said, he just kind of looked surprised, like he was waiting for the bicker, right? He was waiting. And I said, no, I've been engaged with several of imams and the leaders in the Islamic community in Des Moines, and it's just not my experience of them. Here's my experience, and I'll share it with you in a quote. This is what I'm still telling the man. I'll share it with you in a quote. One of the premier Islamic leaders in our city said these words to me, and they're really powerful, so I'm going to share them with you. As Muslim people living in the U.S., we're twice victims. First, we're victims of people who of radical fundamentalist Muslims who take our faith and distort it into something we don't even recognize. And then we're victims of discrimination in the United States because of it. And the man he honestly did not know what to say at that point. And he shifted gears. And then as we were getting off the plane, we were getting ready to get up from our seat, and he looked at me and he goes, you know, he still sized me up as a particular political party, which I thought was rare, but he said, you know, I've never had anybody listen in the way that you did. And I was like, oh, well, okay, you caught me on a good day, I guess. Now listen, that's a good story. I've gotten it wrong 100 times, right? So I've gotten it wrong 100 times. Just know that's hard. But when I say lead with holy curiosity, what I'm saying is when you get the comment, and I'm only going to share one negative narrative here, because like I said, we don't like to share these narratives. Immigrants are stealing jobs. And it's easy to say, you know, immigrants contribute to the economy in this way, and what job, and da-da-da-da-da. And I would encourage you to think of it in this way. Here's the holy curiosity. Oh, I'm so sorry that you have that perspective. That's not my experience, but what jobs in your community have been, you know, who among your friends has had a job stolen? And that has to be genuine. Like that's been a conversation that I've had before. But the reality is the question itself will more often than not indicate that the person is just repeating a talking point that they've heard, and they have no experience of what they're saying. And so that's what I mean by lead with holy curiosity. Because especially in these days when we're very, very siloed and broken, we're broken as a country, that the immediate demonizing of the other person's opinion is not helpful. It's not going to get us where we need to go. I love Anne Lamott. Are any of you Anne Lamott fans? She's kind of crass and not very holy sometimes, but she's very spiritually deep. But Anne Lamott talks about, hold this quote because it challenges me every moment of every day. She said that she was complaining about an individual to a priest friend of hers, and the priest friend of hers looked at her and said, Anne, you can safely assume that you have recreated God in your own image when it turns out God hates all the same people you do. Right? So, lead with holy curiosity, invite dialogue, practice in my experience. Now, our communications person will tell you, and I'll just give you a fourfold graph that you can keep in mind too, that we use in our advocacy, and that is begin with shared values. As Iowans, we believe in Iowa Nice. We believe in helping our neighbors. But here's the barrier that somebody is experiencing. Here's a potential solution, and here's the shared vision that you and I both have.
I grew up in Michigan. Many crops such as peaches and strawberries wouldn't exist without migrant farm workers. What's the current status of migrant farm workers? Are they still being allowed in, or like we've seen in other places, those farmers have just had to leave those crops rotting in the fields?
I don't know the answer to that. I have Jean's email, so I can ask one of our attorneys or legal staff, and I'll get back to you on that. But I just don't know where. There is so much happening around immigration. I just don't even know where some of the particular statuses are and how it's playing out.
Yeah. I have two questions that maybe you can concisely answer, and there's a lot of questions, of course, but number one, I've been concerned about Afghan refugees or migrants, and where does that stand generally? Are they all at risk now? Do you know? I hear from time to time, get rid of them all. So that concerns me. And then number two, more locally, what happened to the proposal? Did it pass to arrest the person who's driving an immigrant someplace that they know that they are here without documentation?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first. That is a bill that's kind of, the slang of that bill is, it's still alive, HF 572, and it's what's called the anti-smuggling bill. It's the smuggling bill is the nickname that it's been given. And we are registered in opposition to that. And what we've tried to be clear about is, like, we're as concerned with victims of trafficking and smuggling as anybody on the planet. Like, we're all in on anti-smuggling. Like, that's not our stance. But what our stance is on that particular bill is that it leaves gray, it leaves a very gray area for people who, whether they know or don't know somebody's particular status, it leaves them open to potential legal trouble for taking somebody to the doctor. And so, which, you know, as good church folk who want to be good Samaritans, that puts all of us at risk. And so our stance on that particular bill is we want to see victims supported as well, but really make it about the victims and make this bill about funding victim services, right? That's number one. And number two, you have to clean up that gray area so that folks who are taking somebody to the doctor on Tuesday aren't going to have that come back to bite them because they did. So it is still alive. It was going to be brought up a couple times last week, and it ended up not making it up for a vote. But it's still alive, and again, sign up for our newsletters, and we keep people regularly posted about that. That's the one that's still alive. Secondly, in terms of the Ukraine, what I would say, and it's not really going to answer your question about Ukrainians in particular, and that is, and Afghans. We have a whole Afghan legal arm of our work. There's enough reason for everybody across the board to have some fear about what is happening because we see it playing out regularly, and that's unfortunate. But are Afghans in danger of losing some status? As much as any, or more danger of losing more status, as much as any group right now. So, or, you know, not as much as any group right now. You know, it's really hard to know, but we have people who have U.S. citizenship that are being deported. So it's a really scary time in a lot of ways. So
I have not a question, but a comment, and this is something I learned at your Know Your Rights training that I went to, and I see this in the news all the time. There's a difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. This case in Wisconsin where the judge supposedly let the guy go, the ICE had an administrative warrant for him, and the judge knew, well, that's not all they need. They need a judicial warrant for him, so therefore he was free to go. And so I don't know what the details are as far as
Yes.
the judge helping him or not, but anyway, ICE didn't have the proper kind of warrant to take him right then.
Those are things that you would learn in a Know Your Rights presentation. So by all means, watch our communications, sign up for one of those, and be made aware. That particular case, I was in a car going to Storm Lake yesterday to where Jean was for 2.5 hours with one of our attorneys, and I picked her brain left and right and inside and outside about, you know, the judge's rights and the judge's ability to have judicial, I don't know what they call it, but to oversee her own courtroom, right? So anyway, that's a very particular case, but it does get into some of those different types of warrants scenarios that are part of a Know Your Rights presentation. So definitely. We are getting ready to finish here as I'm watching the clock. So I did want to give a couple commercials. A lot of people ask, what can we do in this time? And I would say we have volunteer roles, certainly, particularly for those of you who have are bilingual or multilingual. We have a real need for interpreters and translators right now. So if that is you, we do have always have volunteer opportunities for advocates, people who show up to court hearings, or not court hearings, to legislative committee hearings and those kinds of things. And then we also have regular needs for our immigration legal clinics for just hospitality, sometimes childcare, those kinds of things. We do also have a volunteer form that you can fill out on our website and just let us know what you want to volunteer for, and our volunteer coordinator will get in touch with you. Secondly, and I'm going to put the microphone down. That is the front and the back of a yard sign. Those are $20 because we have to pay for the printing. But if you want to buy a yard sign today, I carry those everywhere I go. There's nothing that gives a shot in the arm to our founding director more than seeing one of those signs in the community. So she'll come in the morning and say, there was a sign sighting, and it's like a huge shot in the arm for her. So please, if you have a yard that you can display, those are $20. I do have a QR code and envelopes or cash.
What about if we have more than $20 to share?
If you
with
have more than $20, then first of all, well, let me start where I always start with that, which is just gratitude. You all, Walnut Hills has been a supporter of our work for a while now, and in some really big ways. So thank you as a congregation. Secondly, and our biggest need right now, no doubt about it, is funding. You know, we have been affected by federal funding cuts. Our naturalization program, that we were doing that in partnership with LSI, Lutheran Services of Iowa, and you know that they just had our naturalization program. They were doing the education side, we were doing the legal side, and that funding was just eliminated. So that leaves a 5-figure deficit in our budget, I can tell you that. So anyway, funds are critical for us right now, and individuals have been so generous, and faith communities have been so generous. In particular, one of the campaigns that we're doing right now this year with faith communities is we're looking for 25 congregations who will commit to giving $2,500 in 2025. It's really catchy, I think. Yeah. But anyway, if you're that faith community and you have that capacity, I would invite you to be one of our 25 and 25 congregations. And then, of course, individual donations. And if you give an individual donation, you will get a nice personal thank you note from me.
Please join me in thanking Susie.
Thank you all. Thanks for your support.
And thank you all for those of you who've come to many